Ever imagine living in a city where the air is so bad, it's basically hazardous to even step outside?
Yeah, that's a scary thought.
Well, unfortunately for the folks over in Lahore, Pakistan, that's exactly what they're dealing with right now.
It's November, which is typically when they see a spike in pollution levels, but this year it's like nothing they've ever seen before.
We're talking a full-blown air quality crisis.
Right, and when we talk about air quality, we often use this term AQI, that stands for Air Quality Index.
Yeah, it's that number you sometimes see on your weather app.
Exactly. And in Lahore, the AQI has been going absolutely haywire, hitting numbers above 1,000.
1,000. Whoa, okay. So for context, anything over 300 is already considered hazardous to your health.
Yeah, I mean, you start getting into the 300s, and that's when officials start issuing warnings, telling people to stay indoors.
Right. But over 1,000, I mean, that's just...
It's unprecedented.
So what does this actually mean for people living in Lahore? Like, what are they experiencing on the ground?
Well, when you have an AQI that high, it basically means the air is filled with a dangerous cocktail of pollutants.
And the biggest culprit here, from what I've read, is something called PM 2.5.
PM 2.5, yeah. These are microscopic particles, like way smaller than a grain of sand.
How small are we talking?
Think of a single pollen grain and then cut it into 30 pieces. That's how tiny these things are.
So small you can't even see them.
Exactly. And that's what makes them so dangerous because they can easily get lodged deep inside your lungs and even enter your bloodstream.
And once they're in there, they can wreak havoc on your respiratory system and your heart.
It's a recipe for all sorts of health problems, especially for vulnerable groups like children and the elderly.
It's really alarming. And I read that Lahore's PM 2.5 levels hit a staggering 610 recently.
Wow.
That's over 40 times higher than the limit recommended by the World Health Organization.
That's just insane. I mean, at those levels, you're talking about serious long-term health consequences for a huge population.
So what's being done about this? What steps are people taking? What's the government doing to try and get this crisis under control?
Well, the government has declared a state of emergency and put some pretty drastic measures in place.
Like what?
For starters, they've shut down schools, which is never an easy decision.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, that disrupts the lives of so many families.
Right. But it's a necessary precaution to protect children from the harmful air.
So they're keeping the kids home. But what about everyone else?
They've also urged businesses to allow employees to work remotely.
Makes sense. Keep as many cars off the road as possible.
Exactly. On top of that, they've imposed restrictions on the use of certain types of fuel that contribute heavily to air pollution.
What else?
They've banned outdoor grilling, which might seem like a small thing, but it does add to the overall pollution levels.
Right. Every little bit counts in this situation.
And they've also halted all major construction projects, which, again, can generate a lot of dust and particulate matter.
Sounds like they're really throwing everything they can at this problem.
Yeah, it's a pretty comprehensive approach.
But the big question is, are these measures enough? We've seen similar actions taken in other cities battling air pollution with mixed results.
Right. I mean, it's great to see these emergency measures put into place, but it often feels like putting a Band-Aid on a much larger wound.
It's treating the symptoms without really addressing the underlying cause.
Exactly. And the causes of Lahore's air quality woes are multifaceted and complex.
We've got to look at the bigger picture here.
Absolutely. And one major factor that's definitely exacerbating the situation is the weather. Specifically, we're talking about the dreaded winter smog.
Yeah, I've heard that term thrown around. Can you explain what's happening there?
Sure. So as temperatures drop, you get a layer of cold, dense air forming close to the ground.
Kind of like an invisible blanket.
Yeah, precisely. And unfortunately, this cold air acts like a lid, trapping all the pollutants underneath it.
And we're talking about pollutants from all those things we mentioned earlier. Cars, factories, construction sites.
And don't forget about agricultural burning, which is a huge problem this time of year.
Right. Farmers burning crop residue to clear their fields.
Exactly. So all those sources are pumping pollutants into the air, and this layer of cold air keeps it all trapped close to the ground, creating this thick, suffocating blanket of smog over the city.
It's like the city is choking on its own exhaust.
Yeah, it's not a pretty picture.
And to make matters worse, Lahore is also dealing with pollution blowing in from neighboring countries, particularly agricultural burn-off in India.
That's right. It really highlights the transboundary nature of air pollution.
One country's actions can have a direct impact on the air quality of another.
It underscores the need for regional cooperation to address this kind of crisis. You can't solve it in isolation.
It's really a global issue.
Absolutely. And it's not just about environmental concerns either. There's a huge human cost to this kind of severe air pollution.
Yeah, reading the reports coming out of Lahore is heartbreaking.
Mm.
People are struggling to breathe, they're experiencing burning eyes and throats, kids are developing persistent coughs.
Hospitals are seeing a surge in patients with respiratory problems, asthma attacks, heart issues, and even strokes.
It's really taking a toll on people's health and well-being.
And you've got to imagine the stress and anxiety that parents must be feeling.
Having to worry about their children's health every time they step outside, it's a
Yeah.
nightmare scenario.
Absolutely. And it makes you wonder, could this crisis in Lahore be a warning sign for other major cities around the world?
That's the question, isn't it? As cities continue to grow and traffic congestion worsens and industrial activity expands, this problem of air pollution is only going to become more widespread.
Absolutely. So, what lessons can we learn from Lahore's experience, and what can other cities do to prevent this kind of catastrophic scenario from happening in their own backyard? It's something we all need to be thinking about.
Food for thought, for sure.
Yeah.